And we're live. Hey, of course we're live. It's so good to have you join me, Mike, on this live stream. And it's an opportunity for me to actually showcase you. And thank you for allowing me to be a guest on your podcast, not once, but twice. So, welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Nancy. It's a pleasure to be here. This is going to be a new experience for me.
That you told me so. It's one thing to do a podcast and have your editor get rid of the ums and ahs and pregnant pauses. It's another thing to be live and let it roll, let the good times roll, right?
If there's anybody who's going to do a live podcast or a stream, who's going to pull it off with, I can't think of anybody better than Nancy
Thank
Zaire.
you. Thank you so much. So, for those who don't know me, Nancy Zaire, I am the LinkedIn and Sales Whisperer, and I'm introducing you to Mike O'Neill, who is the founder of Bench Builders. And Mike, curious minds want to know how it is that you came to do Bench Builders. What's been your career path?
I started off in a very traditional way, Nancy. Right out of college, I was offered an opportunity to go into HR. And I just kind of got the bug. I absolutely loved HR. And I had the good fortune to go to work for a very fast growing company. And over the span of 10 years, it grew and grew and grew. And I had a chance to take on more and more responsibilities. I stayed in HR, moved to another smaller company that also grew. So my background is corporate HR, going to work for small companies that grew very fast. And when I left the corporate HR world, it was a company that was Fortune 500. The team that I was leading supported about 12,000 employees.
Whoa, well, that was a big company at that point. And HR has many facets to it, Mike. And when the company's small, you're lucky if you have a person. Sometimes it's a position that is given to to one person who wears many hats. But obviously, you grew and grew with these companies, which means that you probably specialized. And I'm curious to know, what was your specialty in HR?
Yeah, I started off as an employment center manager. They created the role. So, what did I know about being an employment center manager? But you kind of learn. Over time, what ended up happening is I kind of became what would be best referred to as a generalist. I had to be familiar with a variety of things, but the things that I went on and got some advanced training on included training. I went back and got a master's degree from Vanderbilt in human resources development, not because I envisioned that I would be doing the training, but I was hoping to lead that function.
I get it. And, one of the things that I especially appreciate about you is your ability to be an effective communicator, and specifically your ability to listen. Mike is an excellent listener. When I've been a guest on his podcast, or if you listen and tune into any of his podcasts, you'll see that not only does he listen very closely, but then his questions reflect that thoughtfulness that comes from deep listening. So I would love to know how you acquired that skill, because it is a skill. We're not born with it.
I appreciate you asking. When I left corporate HR and started my own business, I actually had a business partner and we focused primarily on the training aspect. But as I got more and more familiar with the needs of, in this case, we were calling on smaller companies. They needed help in the HR area. They needed help in a variety of ways. And so, from a listening standpoint, this is something I had to kind of develop. I had to listen to internal customers to really hear what was the real issue that they were struggling with in hopes that we could find a solution for them. As a business owner, Bench Builders, even my own company has morphed in the time that this business has been up and running. Yes, we do HR consulting. Yes, we do executive comp work. Yes, we facilitate strategic planning. But the area that I'm spending more and more of my time is as a coach, particularly as an executive coach. And what I'm finding is listening deeply, not to just what gets said, but listening deeply is so valued by the leaders that I'm working one-on-one with, because so often they're in key leadership roles,
Mhm.
but they're not sure they're being heard.
Mm. Interesting point that you bring up, because when someone's not heard, there's a tendency to speak more loudly or speak more often or, speak a lot of words. And actually, am I right, Mike? Just the opposite is needed. You need to be a better listener when you think you're not being heard. Well, how do you respond to that?
I would agree. I will generalize, and that is, as I'm working with key leaders, what I have found is they are successful because that's what got them to where they are. But there is no school out there that teaches you how to run a business, how to be a member of the C-suite. You find that they just figure it out over time. And I guess what I would say to you is when you're working one-on-one with these leaders, we have to acknowledge that they are surrounded by people who tend to say yes.
Hmm. Right? Because it's the boss.
It is the boss. And what I would throw out to you is the leaders I like to work with are those
Mhm.
who are not willing to get complacent. They want
Mhm.
more for themselves, they want more for their organization, and they're open to do even new things.
Mhm.
But those new things sometimes are surprise things. It's behaviors they might not have thought about, such
Mhm.
as what you just mentioned. And that is, if you really want someone to listen, sometimes there's real value in speaking softly.
Mhm. Mhm.
I know that I'm talking to the sales and LinkedIn whisperer, but there's real power.
It's so true. And what you're telling me is there are several things I'm reflecting on as I heard what you said. One of them is that people get promoted to a level of they're out of their comfort zone. They're promoted to the Peter Principle says, a place where they're actually incompetent. And so there's a learning curve involved. But as long as the person recognizes it's a learning curve, that there's still more for me to grow and gain, that I'm not at that level, I'm striving to the level. That's where someone like you can come in handy, because you do have a wealth of experience and wisdom about running organizations, and especially from the point of view of working with people. Because bottom line, Mike, I don't care what the business is. If your people aren't producing and performing, then the work isn't getting done. So again, comment on that.
It really is true. The most common thing I hear from key leaders is if it wasn't for the people, I would love what I do. It's the people problems that oftentimes are most challenging for leaders at all levels of the organization. I have the good fortune that I've worked through a wide variety of people problems as I help support businesses, both as a corporate HR and for the last 15 years in a consulting capacity. But it's those people issues. It's the people issues that don't stop as you go up. And it's not unusual. The biggest challenges are other members of the key leadership team.
You're reminding me as a parent, we give birth to this baby, and there are new challenges involved in becoming a parent. And you think, okay, that's it, I've met it. And then they reach a toddler stage, and now there are new challenges to that. And then they reach, various stages. Each of those stages presents more, I'm going to use the word problems, more challenges. And it's the same managing an organization. There are different levels and complexity of problems that occur. So as you solve one and as you master one, guess what? More pop up, or maybe they were always there, but they were masked and not as urgent because of the other issues involved. Is that a reasonable perspective to take as I can think about developing leaders in organizations?
Very much so. That is particularly true when an organization is growing. So
Mm.
the individual leader is having to learn how to do what they do better because the demands are being placed on him or her in new ways. But when an organization is growing, that presents a whole new set of challenges. It truly does result in growing pains. And so what I would throw out to you is when you marry a leader who wants to grow personally and professionally,
Yeah.
who is leading a growing organization, it opens up opportunities through coaching, through executive coaching, to really step back and ask, what are the things that I, the leader, can do that will have the most profound impact on my effectiveness as a leader, thereby the effectiveness and outcomes of the company?
Very good question to ask. I'm going to go back to the issue of, again, the challenges that leaders face in managing employees. And I'd like, if you would, Mike, to mention maybe generically some of the typical categories of problems that you have consulted on and that you've helped leaders tackle and overcome. What are some of them?
Well, the ones I see time and time again is sometimes the ones that are most difficult to acknowledge. As you take on more and more, there can be a sense of overwhelm. So much is expected of them. They're in a highly visible role. They find that all this begins to put pressure on them. It begins to affect them in their role as leaders, but it also affects them as parents.
I was going to say they take it home, right? Because you can't really compartmentalize your life. I mean, I'm a psychologist, right? We're holistic. We're not just workers or, leaders. We're holistic people. We're members of families and organizations, etc., besides our employment status. And so if something's off kilter in one part of our life, there's a good chance it's going to affect other parts of our lives. And so overwhelm, maybe you need to say more about the different feelings that are typical of the person who comes to you that they may or may not have acknowledged, because some of them are so painful, they may not be ready to acknowledge them.
It could be said there's a misnomer about what coaching is all about. And so what I would say is my approach to coaching is I make the assumption that the leader I'm working with knows what's best, but they may have blind spots. So it could be that what triggers an interaction I have with a potential new client is that sense of overwhelm. It is very common that blind spots could be an area that they're realizing that there are things that they have not picked up on, and having an objective third person after speaking with them might be able to point out some of those blind spots that they didn't know they had.
And this is interesting because it does relate back to sales, because as salespeople, one of the things I talk with my clients about is their blind spots. And usually they occur, Mike, because of the fact that their personality style, it cuts both ways. There are pluses, there are minuses. And if they're not aware of the minuses, and particularly the minuses that impact other personality styles, then it becomes a blind spot. But when they are aware of it, they can rein it in. And then they're much more effective as salespeople because they're able to understand, the lay of the land and not make it about them.
If I could elaborate, we all have blind spots. And as a result, we are vulnerable to not seeing things. And so as a coach, what I try to do is help them see things that they perhaps can't see. And there are times that I need to say to them things that no one else dares say. I need to be bold as their coach and say those things. And if the relationship is in place and the trust is established, then we can work on those things that will, in fact, improve their effectiveness as leaders.
Yeah. And what you said is so important, because any relationship really has to have the foundation of trust and goodwill. And I'm sure our listener or viewer right now, as they're tuning into you, Mike, they can't help but notice you have a beautiful tone of voice. He has a beautiful presence and deportment, which just shouts to me that this is a fellow that I can trust, that I can feel comfortable with, that I can share intimate information, and that he would keep it confidential. So I think your whole demeanor tells me that this is the kind of coach you are.
You're kind. I do appreciate that. And it's always nice to be able to do something that comes a bit more natural and to do things you love doing. And that is something I'm finding that I'm loving doing,
Right.
working with key executives and hopefully using those skills that I fine tune, listening in particular.
So we will definitely make sure that Mike's information is in the notes, the comments there. Of course, we're doing this on LinkedIn, so you can easily look Mike up, although there are other Mike O'Neills. So it's very important you get this one, because this is the one that can help executive coaches to own their brilliance and own their position and bring out the best to support their companies and their employees. Any last comments you'd like to make before we tune out?
Nancy, I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you. It is not an accident that you are a two-time guest on my podcast. The wisdom and the way you go about presenting yourself, I loved it. The folks who listened to the podcast benefited from that. So thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you today.
This is so much fun. I love to turn the tables on people who've given me the gift of being a guest, and now I get to reciprocate. So to your sales success, it's Dr. Nancy Zare, LinkedIn Whisper, and we'll see you online.